It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Kimi, for this program this month, Hidden Stakeholders, Unheard Objections. $100 billion annually is wasted on toxic culture and bad team dynamics. Kimi knows this is an opportunity. Kimi Ziemski likes to get things done. She was raised by her grandfather, who didn't think she could make a living studying theater and medieval history. When she moved on from parchment scrolls to scrolling screens, that began a long career and generated over $300 million in revenue in telecom. Her grandfather was relieved. That move to tech and leadership years ago showed her that the stresses and the challenges of facilitating conflict resolution in a productive way will meet each other. Now, they will either explode, implode, or improve. That's why Kimi works with organizations to improve their productivity by using the talents and capacity of their amazing teams, AKA their amazing people. Her clients drive better schedules and better budget control, 17 and 12% better to quantify it. This from honing your leadership? Yes. And a critical part of your leadership is how you help your teams deal with conflict. So don't get ready to grumble, but Kimi, let's get started.
Absolutely. So the presentation that you're going to be seeing now is essentially part of a power skills bundle. These are the skills that I believe we as technologists tend to need to improve on. But the problem is, you know what? Nobody makes this part of an engineering or a finance or a sciences curriculum, and very few of them make it part of a standard business curriculum. So that is where we are focused with our Power Skills Bundle. And this one presentation, it's probably one of the most popular, in part because most of us have had some kind of dreadful situation where we actually ended up having to meet the expectations and overcome objections of someone we didn't even know was involved in what we were trying to do. So when you are executing a contract for your client, I don't think it's putting too fine a point on it to say that as consultants, we actually have a slightly higher bar to meet than someone who is part of the permanent family in the organizations that we serve. So one of the things that I would like to have you take a look at is this. Okay. Oh dear. I'm going to have to relog into Mentimeter. There we go. Now, here is the way. Did you have a chance to describe how Mentimeter works?
No, we have not.
Okay, this is cool. I don't get to do this very often. So on your phone, I want you to go to your browser. Chrome tends to work best, but it'll work with Safari also. Of course, not much is ever going to work again on Internet Explorer, but that's another topic. And type in www.menti.com. And I'm going to put it in the main chat as well. Forgive me, when you're treated to the side of my head, it's because I've got a couple of screens going. And there we go. And I type something into the chat, it's usually there. So when you get to menti.com, it's going to say, enter your code. Well, the code is the code at the top of your screen now. That is 9 And I'm going to put that in the chat as well. 99788034. And it's going to ask you to answer a question.
4-3, right? The last two did, or 4-3, I think.
You're absolutely right. It is 4-3. Okay. So we've got one person who's come in, couple. Okay. So I would also suggest that for those of you who are doing presentations to or live proposals to, and you want to over video and you want to make your presentation just a little bit more interactive, one of the things you can do, and obviously I'm a big fan of using a little bit of humor because otherwise that black cat wouldn't be there, is that you can create a Mentimeter. And in a free, and I love that cost, in a free version of a membership to Mentimeter, you are going to have the opportunity to do a couple of presentations. As many as I do, I have a subscription, I will confess. Okay, so it looks like we've got the majority of people are saying it's happened. I think I'm on top of it, but I wouldn't mind a few hints. And then a couple of people said, that's dreadful. It's happened to me rather recently. And yes, I love it. That's where I was when I came up with this topic because it was making me crazy. So the thing is, I want to just point this out to you. We actually cannot stop it. What we can do, though, is we can make a little bit more of an issue with solving it, mitigating it, or there we go, addressing it in such a way that it stops being your main pain in the neck. Okay. So just a quick check. I want to make sure that you are now seeing my slide. Awesome. Okay. So some other ways that you can have potential sources for stakeholder identification. Because typically if they're hidden, it's a difficulty to actually find them. All right. So please put in the main chat, we're going to do something else with Zoom that can be kind of fun. We're going to do something called a chat fall. Now, has anybody ever done a chat fall before? Raise your hand if you've done a chat fall before. Ah, okay. Thank you, Volker. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you to type in how you currently figure out who your stakeholders are. And then I'm going to ask you to hold off until I say the word post and then hit enter. So how do you currently identify who the stakeholders are in your proposal or in your client firm on a contract? I don't know about you, but I'm always tempted to hum the Jeopardy song to myself when I'm timing something like this.
Are we supposed to hold it or put it in right now? Put it in right now.
No,
Okay.
You're supposed to hold it.
Okay.
And I want everybody to post it now. Now, here's the thing.
I jumped the gun.
That's okay. That's okay. So let's see. Okay, so we've got folks saying casting a wide net. Good, good. Ask up front before initiating the proposal. That's a great idea. Who's paying the bill? I love it. Harry's very straightforward. Who's paying the bill? And Kate through an intake form. So I'm going to ask Kate, because if you look at Moss's response, Kate, do you do that before or after initiating the final proposal?
I actually do it before finalizing it because it helps me to understand who I really need to be concentrating on and including in things, because with the work I do, I can end up working with teams that are pretty diverse.
Okay.
So I need to know that.
Excellent. And Ulrika has one of my favorite questions. Ask them who else in the organization might care about what we're doing here. Okay. And do a process map. Or you are. No offense, anybody else. You are my favorite. I do suggest doing a mind map, but start with your deliverables. And then, so they are the core, and then jot out. These are the people that we know this deliverable will affect. Who else will it affect? So sort of a combination between what Herb suggested, what Ulrika suggested, and figuring it out who it is that you're going to need to influence before anything. Dawn, not seeing the update on my phone. Gosh, I'm not sure that I actually understand the question, Dawn. I'm so sorry. Okay. The idea is that you have a number of suggestions in here. One of them might touch upon or spark a thought that you hadn't done recently. It's not a bad idea to see if we can do that. Add that to your arsenal, because ultimately, and this is something we've all gotten a lot smarter about lately, ultimately, everybody's a little bit more interdependent than sometimes they realize. And even though you're going to have direct stakeholders who are going to care about the result that you're delivering to them, that doesn't mean necessarily that you should ignore the stakeholders who are part of the broader stakeholder community, so that you have a sense of what's going on with them as well. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. So I want you. Oh, Bruce, that's the best possible of reasons. Then, as Craig said, he's recording it, so you can grab it some other time. Have a lot of fun. So here's what I would like to do. We're going to do a quick breakout, and I want you to create a list. Make sure to have a scribe who can do a cut and paste from that list and post it in the main chat. And I want you to give the top 5 reasons why, once you get started in the engagement, the top 5 reasons your team should be enrolled in the stakeholder identification process as well. Okay. Once you have those 5 reasons, pick one of them and give me a couple of actual steps, actions that people can take in order to make that benefit manifest. So again, 5 top reasons why you should enroll your team in the stakeholder identification process. And then you pick one of them and put a couple of actions, a couple of steps that people can do to make that benefit manifest for your team. Now, Ulrika is the
Yeah, I'm ready with the
reigning
breakout.
monarch of breakouts.
in the control room here. So great. Let's if there are no questions about what you're supposed to do, I'm ready to send you off. All right, here we go.
Okay, so please put in the main chat what you had. So uncover on this.
So Kimi, you want us to put it in the chat? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is we were talking about uncovering unconscious bias. And so we borrowed your suggestion, Herb, and said, first, have a process for doing this, for having this discussion. And second, help people to understand the bigger picture so that they understand when their view has been maybe a little too narrow and they haven't thought about how the results of your program or your project are going to affect more than just the performing team. Okay. So we went a little metaphysical there.
No, I think it's good.
Okay. Convince the client to be open. I like that. Okay. Clarify the deliverables and the criteria for the quality of deliverables. We have a saying in project management that one of the most critical things is understanding the relationship between the success criteria and the performance criteria. So whatever you deliver, however you change the organization, you may meet the performance criteria, but if everybody doesn't agree to continue to do or to continue to adapt these practices, it's not going to matter. Okay, think of it as buying a car. How many of you have an SUV? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hand up. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. Go ahead and lower it. How many of you have a 2-seater? Does anybody here have a 2-seater? Okay. Truck? Motorcycle? Sedan? Okay. That's the difference between performance criteria and success criteria. Every single one of those vehicles will get you from point A to point B. However, not every single one of those vehicles is going to get you all of the other things. Okay. So for example, getting from point A to point B isn't enough for me. I need to look a little cool. So I have a 2-seater with a retractable hardtop. And I love it. Now I can get from point A to point B in the SUV, but honestly, I feel like when I'm driving that one, I've actually been known to lose it in parking lots because apparently the number of dark blue Nissan Muranos in Dyer, Indiana is a whole lot higher than I thought it would be. Okay. So frequently what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish that it makes a difference when you have a plan. Okay. Now, so that speaks a little bit to what Don had said. For one thing, it establishes the purpose. And I will tell people up front that our success in our partnership, you, the client, me, the consultant, me, the project manager, our success is going to be enormously dependent on whether or not we are able to identify all the people who have expectations of us. This partnership, the easiest way to disappoint and to be less than successful is when we haven't even figured out who cares about the success of this project. So 12 Angry Men. Oh gosh, yes. Absolute classic, one of my favorites. The other thing about setting up a process or a plan is that you've got to use it. The other thing that I do is I use it as a team building exercise. All right, as things go, as things change throughout this project, things are going to change. You, my team, how are we going to make sure that we keep identifying all of the people that we need to so that we keep on top of it? Okay, so have a purpose for the plan, for the process. Understand you're going to have one for the team and sometimes one for the project. Okay, and then use it. Whatever processes you establish, please do it. It is amazing. It doesn't have to be massively complicated. It can be as simple as we're going to put a 5-minute time box on our weekly scrums, weekly update meetings, weekly "Are you still with us?" meetings. But we're going to put stakeholders on every single one of those agendas so that we keep it front of mind. You're welcome, Herb. Okay. We don't have a tendency to worry about things sometimes until they break. And that's why I'm asking you to look at the identification of stakeholders. Because one of the things that you'll find is as you figure out who some of the peripheral stakeholders are, who, if they get upset with you, might turn into a key stakeholder, a core stakeholder. As you figure out who they are, you start to be able to do a lot better job at diagnosing what their potential hotspots may be. And I'll give you an example. It's embarrassing, but it was one of mine. One of my first big installations was a data and phone system back in the day, long time ago. And we had to completely rewire a printing plant. Now, this plant put out a newspaper, so I didn't have any clue about this, but one of the things that they told us was you have between 3 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the morning to redo all the connections. So we could wire anytime, but in order to actually change out 385 pieces of phone and data gear, we had to do it all in 3 hours flat. My initial schedule had us doing that on the 15th of the month. And I hadn't identified the finance department as a stakeholder. Why? Well, because we actually worked with the controller of operation, the chief operations officer, and the IT folks. What on earth does finance have to do with this? Well, when I published the first schedule, somebody asked me a very straightforward question. Do you know what happens on the 15th of every month in this firm?
Invoicing.
Payroll. Even scarier, it was payroll. And you know, wisdom and self-interest says you don't ever mess with the people who are going to cut your paychecks. we were absolutely convinced that the installation would go beautifully. We had taken all sorts of care to make sure it did. And we moved it to the 17th anyway, just in case. Because the 15th was payroll and the 16th was, yes, you were absolutely right, invoice processing. Essentially, the client was kind of amused because he told me that he wanted it cut. That's what we called it. It was a cut. He wanted it cut in the middle of the month. It didn't occur to him that I took him quite literally. The 15th was the middle of the month. So luckily it didn't cause any grief, but in a less, shall we say, understanding or forgiving clientele, it would have been a huge, huge deal. So you've got to take a systems approach. You want to look at not just all the pieces of what has to happen and all the people that it's going to happen to, but how it's going to affect all of those people is a little bit more of a global and broad spectrum issue. So identifying who the stakeholders are, a big, big, massive deal. Okay. So interdependency is a big deal. As I said, you really don't want to mess with the finance department when they're cutting checks or processing expense reports or invoices. But you also want to be very clear that the values and attitudes of how people think are going to be shaped not just by their own personal values and biases and logical fallacies, but in the way that the organizational culture has decreed they will approach the issue. Now, in that first major data voice combination installation, the culture was you couldn't ask a straightforward question without somehow offending someone. So communications around what has to happen was a much more Socratic approach. And I like to blame it on my youth at the time, was in the habit of being very straightforward and very blunt. And if I had a question, I tended to ask exactly that question. So one of the suggestions that was made was, ask questions that are more open-ended, the kinds of questions that you were looking at, identify perspectives, and assumptions. How would you do that? It would be a much more conversational and Socratic approach. But the thing is, when you look at it, that also helps you create solutions that might be bigger than the sum of its parts, even though you have more parts than you might have initially identified. Okay. Now, what is the benefit as a consultant? We go in, we're expected to solve a problem. What is the benefit of our taking the time to do this stakeholder identification ahead of time? To actually, at the very beginning, what's the benefit to our client who's probably chomping on the bit? Please put your answer in the main chat. It does eventually save time and money. Absolutely, Diane. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Moss. Ulrika, absolutely. Let's face it. If employees have a mandate to make sure that their bosses are never surprised, it's an even more critical mandate for us. And it's a much more long-term success. Absolutely. I am so sorry I didn't hit the mute button fast enough. It saves mental health. It absolutely does. And not just for our client, but it can also help them justify bringing us back. Because one of the benefits that we will deliver to them is the management of the stress level of the people who are ultimately their stakeholders. They're not just our stakeholders, they're their stakeholders. So that becomes a big, big deal. When you have a broader perspective, you are going to be able to collaborate on a solution that is going to be much more lasting. Now, this doesn't mean that it might not be an iterative approach, but it does mean that it might not take as many iterations. Okay. So ultimately, to a certain extent, as you're interviewing, you want to ask yourself a couple of very straightforward questions. One, are they the person who has enough power or authority to be a showstopper if their expectations are not met? And two, can that person that you're speaking to at this point in time, can they point you to someone else so that you can make sure that you have an opportunity to cast that net broadly, as was said earlier, to make sure that you've gotten the opportunity to do that. Now, the first one isn't because I think we should only talk to the power people in the organization, but because we're going to need to prioritize our stakeholders. So give me a hands up if you currently prioritize your stakeholders into those who can be showstoppers or those that you just need to keep informed. Does anybody prioritize your stakeholders right now? Okay. And Don's saying, I do. And Nora's saying, well, sort of. Okay. So let me point this out. We don't have all the time in the world, and they almost, correct me if I'm wrong here, they almost never give us enough time to do what we are asked to do. So we need to be able to prioritize who we spend time communicating with to make sure that we always hit our must updates, that we do our level best to nice to update, but that we always address the people in the must update clause. Another way of identifying stakeholders, though, is also to keep an eye on the industry news, depending on what type of client you're working with in terms of business to business, because, well, quite recently, I did a short-term project for a very local bank, and I happened to see in one of their newsletters that there were talks about a merger coming up. So we started talking about who the probable department heads were going to be as they went through that merger. Were people trying to hide it? Not at all. It's just that it was so top of their mind, it never occurred to them. They hadn't spoken to me about it. And that's one of the things that I don't know, Don, if this is considered officially an unconscious bias. But sometimes something's so very important to a person that they don't even realize they haven't discussed it with you. I like to say it's that moment when you have the feeling that your client or your contact thinks that you have telepathy, despite the fact that you don't. Okay, so again, make sure that they're the person who could whether or not they're the showstopper, potential showstopper, and is there anybody that they think we should probably speak to? Okay. Boop, boop. Okay. So some suggestions of questions that we really, really don't want to ask. And this also speaks to some of the things that you have suggested. Hello, what was that? Go back. Go back. Go back. Okay. So as you get to know everybody, these are some questions we strongly suggest you avoid. Why is it? Go ahead and unmute your mic. Tell me, why should we never ask these questions?
I apparently seem to be asking them quite a bit.
Okay. Here's the thing. Most organizations' strategic objectives are on their website. Now, I know that every single one of you probably researches your client. One question in this that I sometimes ask, even though I tell people most of the time, please don't, is what is the prioritization of these objectives for your department? If I'm not doing an organizational-wide engagement, then I will usually want to find out, okay, which of these objectives is the most important to your department? Which is the one that you're focusing on? So the prioritization one, I sometimes ask if I'm not doing an organization-wide one. But sometimes I'll just confirm. So I noticed as I was researching, you have these 4 objectives. I am assuming they're listed in order of priority, but I just thought I'd better double check if my assumption is correct. Okay. That prioritization is important because as you go through the rest of your discovery, it's entirely possible that you will find that you might not be able to affect it as much as possible. So what is the one question that you find has given you the most information?
I'm still wondering why to avoid the questions. I'm not sure I understood why, because as I said, I'm asking those questions all the time because I don't trust that the website is up to date. And so having some sense of what's actually going on or how they understand it, even if I understand that it's a small, like why avoid them?
Well, there are 2 big reasons. One is that it implies that you haven't gotten enough information or up-to-date information. And during the course of your research, you've probably tried to access every single thing they put out there. If you're going to ask these questions, I usually recommend that you position them as confirmation questions. This is the information that I've gotten through my research. I just would like to check on that, but also to make sure that as you're connecting with them, it can't just be about the organization's objectives. It also has to be about how they feel about the problem that they're bringing you in to solve. Ask them, what is your perspective on which of the organization's larger objectives is being most hurt by this situation or is being the most negatively affected by this situation? In some cases in my business, I'll ask them, are you expecting short-term or long-term pain if this situation continues? And which of these objectives do you think is going to sustain the most pain? So hold on a moment. Oh, okay. Thank you. So Don had also pointed out, these are linear logic questions, and they very infrequently engage the other two parts of the person who's going to make a decision. Because when you're asking somebody to make a fairly substantial investment, and I'm guessing that you get what you're worth, which means you're probably not something they could put on their corporate credit card necessarily. You have to appeal not just to their linear logic and process part of the brain, but you also have to be able to get their emotions involved. So you have to get to their heart, and you have to give their gut a reason to trust you. Any hint that you might not have done any research can speak to the level, the depth of professionalism that they perceive. It's not the depth of professionalism that you will execute. And for a certain kind of consultant, on the surface level, these are good questions for them to ask because they don't do the kind of research that you do. But I wouldn't ask it just quite like this. And by the way, if you see me doing this, it's because the slides are on that screen, not on the one that I'm looking at. Did that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Which actually went to, what kinds of questions that, whoa, I have a new mouse. Don't you love those? Okay. So rather than do the questions we should ask, I'm going to ask you, what is the most powerful, useful question that you ask when you are doing discovery for your clients currently? We're going to do this as a chat fall, so please type in your answer, but don't post until I say to. All right. Go ahead, post.
Huh.
Ah. Oh, Greg. I can always count on you to dig deeper.
Well, at some point we'll ask that once we've established our credibility.
Well, and also once you've established that trust level.
Yes.
I mean, we've probably all read and maybe not recently, but I know when The Speed of Trust came out, it was hugely, hugely popular with those of us who go in and out of organizations, because we're tasked with building trust in a so much more aggressive time frame than a lot of folks. Oh, I like that. Thank you, Kate. What is your greatest concern? Okay. Diane, I had never thought about putting it that way. Thank you so much. I may have to crib that. Okay. What is the ideal? Ah. Thank you, Volker. So it sounds like you're a fan of the Johari window.
Yeah.
Blind spot. Trying to figure out where somebody's blind spot is that much more difficult. And ironically, as consultants, we're frequently expected to be able to figure that out faster than the people who work with them on a day-to-day basis. which I always find amazing. Okay. So when you're having conversations with people, be very, very clear about what it is along with your focus. Oh, yes. Thank you. Who else do I need to talk with? Okay. Make sure that you stick to the main point for that conversation. Is this a simple introduction? This is somebody you haven't worked with before? Who else will be involved in the decision? Is this somebody that can influence the decision maker, the showstopper, but can't actually make the decision themselves? And if this is our decision maker, how are we going to induce them to go forward? So that call to action that you're talking about. And part of it is to build the trust through a substantive conversation that helps you identify who else you need to work with, but also establish that 3-tiered relationship. Absolutely satisfy the logic. Remember, they're going to make their decision just as much from their emotional bonding with the issue or the solution they hope that you're going to bring to them. And ultimately, they have to have a dang good reason to trust you. We are in essentially the trust business. Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing is, this is what you need to be able to articulate. But if you can't find the stakeholders, if you're not asking these kinds of questions, which I love, by the way, I don't know about you, but I would actually save the chat. Does everybody know how to do that? Have you folks? Okay, so I would save the chat because your colleagues have just given you the gift of some amazing suggestions, because you're going to have to be able to prove what your expertise is worth, not just to the organization, but to each and every stakeholder that you're speaking with. You've got to be able to answer there with them. And that's going to be kind of huge. So in order to do this, you're going to want to go as wide and as deep. Okay. Have a broad overview of what the problem is, but ask them for the details. As was discussed earlier, everybody has their own perspective on what the situation is and on what pain the situation is causing. Because your solution is supposed to get rid of that pain. Make sure that if they give you something, oh gosh, yes. One of the questions that I frequently ask is, how have you tried to address this problem already?
That's a good question.
What have we tried to do already? Okay. And I don't ask who yet, but I ask them to think about that. And then I ask them to think about, did we do a debrief? Did we do a retrospective? Did we do an after action report? I do a lot of work with folks in the military, around the military, or who are former military. So an after action report is a big, big deal to them. And they know exactly what you're talking about then, because then I can ask for a copy of it, because it'll outline what they believe to have gone right and not. Now, along the line, because you have a copy of the report, you also have a copy of the team members.
That's useful.
Yeah, it is. The other thing that it does is it gives you a sense of exactly who you might have on your team who is not necessarily an enthusiastic member of your team. Okay. Now, because we had a couple of conversations that went a little bit longer, one of the purposes for this workshop, one of the audiences is, because this is my personal give back, are job seekers. And I was going to take this slide out. And I decided not to, because in a way, as contractors and consultants, we're always job hunting. So when you get the PDF of this presentation, well, heck, that's one of the reasons why it's in there. Okay. All right. One final chat fall, and then I also have something that I would like to make sure that I offer you. Is there anything that you feel was worth thinking about that you got from this discussion? Please put your answer in the main chat. Diane, to your point, I don't know if you have noticed it consciously, but I've noticed that a great number of people have started to speak to it out loud. We have to be much more explicit in this virtual world than we used to have to be. There's a lot less opportunity for accurate interpretation of nuance. So it has become a big, big deal. So this is what else we do at KSP. But I also want to tell you that there is a website that I'm going to put the link up for. Or is it not, Craig? Were
That's
you able
fine.
to post that document?
I can put it in right now if you'd like, or if you have it, you can. Either way, you have a power tools offer, a bundle.
Absolutely.
And
So
there's a write-up about it. I get it.
I spoke to this earlier. The Power Skills Bundle is a way of giving people a quick either primer or refresh on 4 skills that are critical for those of us who work in areas where a lot of folks are highly technical. And for some of you, this may be more of a brush up. We cover presentations and we focus very heavily on the current state of presentations and technology. There have been a number of studies proving out that most organizations are going to be forever in a hybrid mode, where some of the folks that you speak with might be in the same room with you. Some of them might be in the same room with each other, but you're not in that room, not even in that time zone. So the presentation skills focuses on that. The negotiations session, don't leave it on the table, is also about how to negotiate a little bit more effectively if you never meet that person face to face, and that can be kind of tough. Then there's one on strategic conversations. And last but not least, stakeholder management, stakeholder relationship management. Now, these actually came about Mostly because I've had more students say, why don't you just put that all together? Because I've been posting things now and again on our YouTube channel. So I did. I put it all together, put a price on it, but BACN members get a discount. It's going to be released at the end of this month, and your discount is going to be good for a short period there. And you can tell we are just as inventive with our discount code as you folks are with the personal passcode for the meeting. I thought that was so cute. 2022-06 made it very easy. And I would also encourage you, because you can see on the screen my contact information, and thank you, Don, I just accepted yours, would really love to keep in touch.
Kimi, I put the PDF in the chat, and you'll also be sending folks a PDF of your slide deck, and you're welcome to attach it with that as well for anybody who missed it. Are we doing
Awesome.
Are you going to send the handout PDF later, or?
No, I can put it in the chat right now, except I'm just double checking because I don't think it gives me. Yes, from my computer. Awesome. Okay.
And yeah, we can keep the conversation going. And by the way, will I see you in Tennessee?
I'm afraid not. I got a really amazing offer. So
well,
to do a work. So I thought, well, I think I'm going to be going there.
BACN has a gift for you, but I'll make sure to get it to you. It's from our 200th meeting. So just.
Oh, yeah. All right. Yeah.
I'm delighted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kimi, for your program and for the skilled way in which you facilitated this, and really excited to build on this in our conversations.